Good morning to all. I once again thank Citizen Psycho, Natalia Grumman, and the other members of the Council of the Americas and the Chamber of Commerce and Services for inviting me to speak at this important event for the political and economic relations of the American people. Hello, Eduardo. How are you?
Hola, Eduardo. ¿Cómo anda?
Today is not a day like any other. Yesterday, we attended a macabre show with the Congress of the Nation. They made it clear to us once again that in front of us we have a Congress kidnapped by the Kirchnerism, a Congress that only responds to its own interests. They reminded us that they have a single legislative agenda to break the national state. It is surprising to hear from these honorable Kirchnerism legislators that the spending festival is to stop the cruelty of his government. They, who 2 years ago left us all on the brink for the catastrophe, height to the point of all these initiatives is to bankrupt the state. They know that without access to external funding, because of their constant tax evasion and mistreatment of the creditors, this deficitary spending could only be financed by monetary emission. To reopen the channel of monetary emission implies a return to the catastrophic path of inflationary destruction that cost us so much to leave behind. That is why we say that the Kirchnerism in Congress have no other intention than to return to the 47 million Argentinians to the worst moment of 2023, and also, why not say it, the crisis that they left so much planted and that we were able to successfully avoid. And why would they want to destroy the country to the supposed paladins of poverty? Are they now noble souls who feel the suffering of the most miserable in their own flesh? It is simple. They seek to bankrupt the economy because they know that theirs will always be, and even more so, theirs will always be that people believe that they depend on them. Let's see if it is understood once and for all that Kirchnerism does not care about ruining the lives of all Argentinians in order to go against our management, and it is very easy to understand why they are not in their own flesh what it is to suffer a country with inflation, a country with economic chaos, without working opportunities and stagnant without any horizon, because they always lived from politics and always increased their own salaries at ease, just raising their little hand because all their relatives and friends have lived off of the state for years, either because they are public employees or because they have a legitimate business with the state or the provinces. They see in the economic destruction they cause a great opportunity, because it is then when they approach their future customers the bloody hand of the state. Hidden from a veil of charity for them, each poor is neither more nor less than an opportunity to accumulate even more power to economically submit to the honest citizen. That is why they multiply them. That is why they do not want us to get out of the pit. Any Argentine of work understands that the time of grief first comes, therefore the savings, the sacrifice, and then the results come. That is something that a politician does not understand, or with him it serves to admit publicly. They want to make people believe that the results can appear by magic. In that way they present themselves as those who could solve the problems that since then they themselves caused in the first place, and thus they governed all their lives, ignoring the natural conditions of work and the administration of resources. They do not understand, and it does not matter the injury the society lived in during the last decade and a half. In 2023, the model of the cash reached its limit. The Argentines look at the abyss of chaos and hyperinflation, and in the face of that we assume the risks of undertaking a change of 180 degrees. We decided to stop doing the same as always, to truly change direction. That is why they voted the first liberal libertarian president of history, and all this despite the fact that that change did not promise magical solutions, are much less instantaneous. I did not promise to do more of the same that ruined us, but now doing it well, the commitment with society was not to do things wrong correctly, but to do good, knowing that even through if the fruit harvested would be lasting a year and a half later, we have shown that doing things in another way is possible, that we must not reinvent the wheel, that with the effort and responsibility of both the government and the Argentines, the country can be taken forward, and thus the first results of this arduous process are beginning to be seen. We are finally setting a strong foundation of a new country, a task that the political class of this role of its editor-in-chief for considering it impossible. All politicians were content with managing the decline. We, on the other hand, we went on to dream of greatness. They all did not see beyond the immediate present, and they were the cause of our miserable past, and we think about the future, and we continue to think about the future. That is why many people are excited despite the great effort of these years, and that is why politicians are terrified, because as some referent of socialism confessed in the 21st century, when people are doing better, when the pro-starter, they stop listening to the left-wing governments, because they know that if the country goes forward, people will no longer need them, because they never believed that what we achieved in this year and a half would even be possible. They need to break the illusion of people, because if that illusion is destroyed, they lose forever. That is why their only plan in the present is to sabotage the future, because they want to return us directly to the past. This is what has been demonstrated in the last 3 times in Congress, and they no longer even seek to hide it. Here I want to make an additional reference. Because sometimes one has the feeling that analysts or journalists or those who are dedicated to looking at politics do not have a clear idea of what we have in front of us, what is happening. Perhaps they do not even take the trouble of looking at the dantesque things that are done in the Congress. But there are many who criticize, saying in the first year or during 2024 there was political management, and now there is no political management. The reality is that there are basically 2 great mistakes in that way of making the proposal. The first is not to understand what they are and how they are the characteristics. During the first year, we have managed to pass many reforms. In fact, we have made the largest reform in Argentine history. We have made 8,000 structural reforms in a context of Argentina's most successful stabilization plan. However, one could say, but during 2024 the legislative agenda flowed, and during 2025 it is crumpled, stuck. It is very simple. The reason why things were not approved is because they believed that they were going to go wrong. That is, they enabled it because they were convinced that we were going to finish burning the ideas so that they could perpetuate themselves in power. What happens is that the ideas of freedom are, and they started to work very well. Then when they said that we were not going to be able to lower inflation because inflation is multi-causal, we demonstrated that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, and to have an inflation that traveled 1.5 daily today, or if you want 17,000 annual today, I say the numbers are 1.5 monthly, that is levels of 20%. Not only that we made the largest fiscal adjustment in the history of humanity, we made almost 7 points of fiscal adjustment in the first month of government, something that no one achieved in the 123 previous years. But also we cleaned up the balance of the central bank, and also we took out the strained despite the fact that they said that in an electoral year we were not going to do it. But what always comes first is the moral solution, and well, it was also success. Therefore, they said that later we were going to fall into a kind of Great Depression. Later, while we were still insisting that it was going to be a short time, they began with that it was actually an L that was going to flatten. Later that it was the soft Nike Precipice. Later, they recognized that it was a short time, and then they had no choice but to look at the hours that was told, because if we take the GDP measured by the minutes, misaligned monthly frequency, December 24 ended 6% above December 23, that is. Not only have we managed to defeat inflation, but we also did it with growth. Not only that, but also the cruel liberals took out 12 million people from poverty, and today those who said that people do not have enough to eat, there are 6 million more Argentines who can eat today. So it is not that they supported us and accompanied us or did not obstruct us because they wanted to. Collaborate for having understood the message of the polls. In reality, they believed that everything was going to catch fire and go wrong because the ideas of freedom really work. And naturally, now we are in the election year. If you look at the numbers of the polls, you will understand what is happening. You will understand each of the things that are happening. Because it is very simple, we are in an inflection moment. We are in the face of the possibility of definitively ending Kirchnerism. Specifically, they end the elections because they cannot face the national government in a full and genuine way. That is why the elections are so important. Because basically, the Kirchnerism is going to throw everything there. Do not forget that if it is voted in a different way, they're going to try all kinds of frauds, the chain vote, the pregnant turn. In the schools, not only that, but also the moral fraud, that is the testimonial candidatures. And all the intendants during the apparatus is to say that by September we are going to be seeing the reef of the Kirchnerism, the Kirchnerism of the Kirchnerism of the Kirchnerism of the Kirchnerism of the Kirchnerism. That by September we are going to be seeing the roof of the Kirchnerism. On the other hand, we know that in the October election narrative, they vote with a single paper ballot, got reform that we did. We never did an officialism. Because when the officialisms are officialisms, they want to use the machinery of the state to twist the course of the elections. We, on the other hand, if we do the reforms that Argentina needs, despite whether they benefit us or not, and the testimonials will not be either, and the intendants will not be playing live with their devices, and it is also the national election. Therefore, we have a floor in September, and in October it will be much better. More or less so that they have an order of magnitude. When we face the ballot, the key to being able to win the ballot was that we lost the province of Buenos Aires by less than 16 points. As we lost the province of Buenos Aires in the ballotage by 2 points, we won in the ballotage by 14 points. What is the problem that the Kirchner faces today, that given its best election, which will be the September one? We are in a fight, and that if people are going to vote, that fight it can be inclined in favor of us because the more people vote, the less the apparatus weighs. And the reality is that if we also get to win in September, because in October we are going to win, but if we win in September, we would be putting the last nail in the coffin of Kirchnerism, an end of current populism, an operator that ambushes us so much. In addition, we have the mandate and moral obligation that for the first time in decades, the illusion is corresponded with a better future, and that is why we have dedicated all our government effort to build the country from the ground up, not from the top down, as if it were to grow from its leaves so that a tree grows. Let's remember for a second where Argentina was a year ago when I spoke before this same council. We had an economy still hit hard by hangover with severe distortions with the exchange rate and a gap around 40% with an inflation that still traveled up 4% per month and with a risk that was above 1,500 points at that time. We invite you to judge not our intentions to fulfill the path drawn, and we even wish that the path would be sustained despite any global turbulence that could exist and go that there have been global turbulence in the last 12 months. Today, a year later, we have traversed an important stretch of that path, and we invite you again to judge us, but this time not to judge for what we have done, for the results obtained. We are well aware that these results are the first and that we still have a long way to go, because if there is something that we learned from the past is that if we want to take Argentina to the top and turn it into a skyscraper, first we must sit down safe and deep foundations so we will ensure that the building does not collapse, as has happened so many times. And in our first half of the government, it was based on removing the earth and digging deep to make changes from the root to heal a devastated macroeconomy. Servitude is not a break to the creativity and investment of the Argentines to recompose the system, our prices, so that all economic agents can make better decisions as we anticipated. At that time, our intention is to do things right instead of doing them fast, and so it was. I take, for example, the exchange rate, one of the greatest economic distortions that our management inherited, and one of the main focus of the private sector since day zero this year. As we promised, we managed to get out of the debt without a dollar hit, but with a convergence of the dollar parallel to the official and without an inflationary hit. Another thing that you are going to have to recognize, that the path through is only a fallacy, in that it is a mistake of economists who do not know monetary theory. That is, despite the constant attempts to destabilize the exchange rate, the Argentine economy did not experience any path through. Thanks to our peso turnstile, there was no monetary validation that would justify an increase in the rest of the economic prices. And this I clarified before. All this we achieved in a context of international volatility that is not seen for years. Argentina, thanks to keeping its macroeconomic anchors faithful, managed to cross the storms in the form of external shocks to find where it is today. You could then ask where Argentina is today. Today we find the country whose inflation travels in the area of 1.5% per month. That is, we are around 20% per year, with a country risk located around 700 points. A country whose economy has been growing sustainably at the rate of 6% per year, according to the latest data. I want to make a note of color about this, because sometimes people hear anxiety, especially those who have taken some grief course to understand. The logic of how the compound interest works, that is, how the exponential functions work, especially in the matter of growth. There is something called the rule of 70. The rule of 70 has to do with the number of years that you need to double the GDP. So, for example, if You grow to 7%, and 10 years you will be able to double the GDP because it is important. Because we have been growing at a rate of 6% at this time, and obviously that when we leave behind the risk and that no one is already afraid of the stability, the fiscal balance, that I also thank the 83 heroes of yesterday who defended that fiscal balance against the degenerate Saxes. Only the fiscal balance will ensure growth of 4%, but if we also add the enormous structural reforms that we have been doing since the Ministry of Regulation and in human capital, and it will have to do with openness, we will be able to permanently make a higher growth rate. In fact, if it was 6% in 10 years, in 11 years we would be doubling the GDP, but in 22 years we would be multiplying it by 4, and we would be already at levels of a power. It is not so far away. It is only about doing things right. It is only about embracing the ideas of freedom, and as soon as we continue to embrace that, half Argentina will be great again. Do not have doubts. On the other hand, there is also a whole discussion about the exchange, and others, although the exchange rate floats, the type of exchange floats, it seems that they still do not internalize it. I'm tired of getting angry with economists. That is, it seems that they are allergic to reading. Hick, Mises, Rothbard, but at some point they will read them and understand how the price system works. They will understand that it is their fatal arrogance that they will understand what it is about the use of information society. But if we want to look at the e-exchange problem, not only that they are type of e-exchange is free and unified, and its value is below what the financial dollars were a year ago. That is, today the dollars more, it does not differ much from when we assumed the parallel, and I did not want to talk about it if they just it. For inflation, and the truth is that these are long-term consultative issues, because this could be explained in part by our sustained commercial surplus based on record exports in different sectors of our economy. In the energy sector, because, for example, we had the largest commercial balance in the last 35 years, driven by an uncountable amount of investments that are being made in the sector. In fact, yesterday we met with 2 miners, and each one of them will end up making an investment of $20,000 million that will generate a huge amount of money in what has to do with that export of minerals. That is, neither to talk about everything that has to do with continuing to develop Tidcal, not to talk about everything that the Argentine field provides, not to talk about everything we have to do in nuclear matter. That is, from now on, what is left is not only dollars, but we must also take into account that it is not only dollars, because in the end it is neither more nor less than when one looks at the dollar. It is the relative price of the dollar with respect to a peso, and it is also important the tough monetary policy that we carry, of not letting ourselves be carried away by the siren songs that ask for monetary protection so that someone is come with the interest rate. Guys, if one fixes the amount of money, they are in the election year, they have volatility in the demand for money, and on the other hand there is the risk. Where do they want the interest rate? What do you think? That is, they can have a rate of interest of normal conditions and low pressure and temperature when on the other hand they have those who want to break the entire country impossible, so I cry less because of the volatility of the rate that quite let's say that we are, let's say, carrying with a jump for the economy despite the cucas. And on the other hand, as always, there are those who complain. Yes, there are people who complain about the current account. Now the issue is that the current account deficit is explained mainly by the increase in the import of capital goods for the rehabilitation of our economy, and this deficit is financed entirely by the private sector. There are several questions to discuss. In the background, the deficit of the current account has nothing more to do with the difference between domestic savings and investment. That is to say, when the balance conditions of the local economy imply an interest rate of intertemporal coordination of the international one, the economy generates a current account deficit exactly because there are investment opportunities that can be made and that in other contexts could not be made. Therefore, if the current account deficit is generated by investment, it is not a problem, it is more a few. Look at us in 2017, we had a current account deficit of 8 points of the GDP and 7 were explained by the tax deficit. Today, 1.8 of the current account deficit, that is nothing more than the current account deficit, and everything derived from the private sector is more. I am going to tell you something. Overcome the elections, finish the risk. You know that the interest rate is going to drop, and you know that it is going to generate more current account deficit, obviously, but it is a current account deficit that is going to generate by whom? The private sector, and it is resolved between private, and it manifests itself in the exchange market. So much fear, they have the system of prices. Basically, there is. I did not see a reason for so much question about something. That economic theory has explained and proven so widely, it is incredible that decisions are being made and they are being loaded with fears in function of improper models that have been failing for 70 or 80 years, and also that they are bad on top of that. That is, they are not good at the theoretical thing because they are collections of non-consistent partial equilibrium models. That is, having a system of equations does not imply that you have a system of general equilibrium. We would have to explain the difference. We need to do a little more teaching, but then they are almost natural results, because this is in fact all the countries that have made strong convergence have lived many years with current account deficits. So when economists appear to them, scaring them by the current account, look at what the current account is composed of, and if it is for investments and the entire private sector is left there, the public sector is not involved. Go ahead, because it is resolved in the private sector, and there is the prelude to strong the economic growth. I could not stop deviating a little always. Also, we managed to put in function the incentive regime to large investments that covers different industrial sectors such as energy and mining. We have already presented about 20 projects. I remember that in fact what the opposition said, and I believe that the reason why it was approved was that it was not going to work. And not only that, we have 20 projects approved. They already committed $35 billion, while the Soviet Union still has no rig in the province of Buenos Aires. And if that were not enough, we managed to do all this by marketing our country thanks to our firm commitment to the fiscal surplus. We managed to reduce the public debt consolidated in more than $55 billion. They listened well. We reduced the debt to $50 billion, which represented a reduction of 10% of the stock of the public debt, and we achieved this without access to international markets, so we had to resort to paying cash for debt. Sales, those who manage companies and others know how difficult it is to live without a rollover. Here the best Minister of Economy in history did it together with Pablo Kachner. Thank you, Turtle. Thank you, Pablo. But all these achievements are more than starting to come out of the well in which we were sinking by politics. It is true that we have advanced, but we have not come out of the storm. On the contrary, we are in the middle of a political turbulence whose result would determine the future of the Argentine Republic. For the first time in the last century, two models of different countries awaiting the decision of the sovereign Argentine people in the background. What I'm saying is there is a Chinese curse that says, I wish I to live interesting times. The reality is that we are facing a very interesting moment in history. For the first time, the Argentines are going to go to the polls with a choice of two models. Unfortunately, and thanks to the enormous talent of each of my ministers and each of the Argentines who accompanied this, we can also expose results and people will be able to choose. The people will be able to choose between the path of freedom and prosperity or continue embracing the collectivist socialist ideas. So there is wonderful. We are facing a moment of climax, and I hope that the Argentines decide for freedom. In fact, without going too far, we are a few days from the local legislative elections in the province of Buenos Aires, our largest province, and 2 months from the national legislative elections that will significantly change the composition of our Congress. This represents a signal of alarm for the Kirchnerists. They know that time is running out. They know that we are going to erase and we are going to remove the seats that they use today for their own benefit. That is why they are desperate, giving up any resource at the beach to destroy the macroeconomic order and generate the crisis that ends with it. Government elected by the popular vote, they did not care about burning the economy and the social order. They have already done it, and then they were offered as saviors, willing to govern over the ashes of the fire that they themselves caused. So they are, the Kirchnerismo is an emblematic case. Its arrival to power was more than a social exploration generated by the same meth. Later the charges were distributed. They know that our greatest strength is the macroeconomic order, because if our super habit model acts like an armored ship, the deficitary model they want to return to us is similar to a bucket full of holes, and the reason is simple. They have come to extract the wealth of Argentines as quickly as possible, and the long-term benefit of having the accounts in order does not form part of their concerns. They want to return right now to continue squeezing the milk cow. That is why they take out laws that are attentive to our surplus and fiscal. That is why they try to separate the local national elections to confuse people and ensure the prevalence of the verdict, but people already know them. They already suffered for 20 years. They are aware of all their tricks, and as in 2023, again he will tell them enough so that they understand the class of politicians with whom we are dealing with. Recently, a candidate from the opposition made an alarm on television about that his only plan is to stop the deregulation process to prevent the investments that our country needs. That is a type of psychopathy, or the historical people of the country. They believe that Argentina belongs to them, including their people and their wealth. and they prefer to be owners of a destroyed country rather than citizens standing up to a prosperous and great nation. That is why they are able to transform paradise into a hell world. Such a return, that is why I say that it is not just them or us, it is them or the Argentines. I am only in the middle. Argentina is playing the most important game in its history. It must decide whether it persists in the path of change and growth or whether it takes a step back to return. The path of misery and the chivalrous servitude. There are only two paths: or we finish what we started and we change the country definitively, or we go back and throw all our effort into the trash. Our doors are open to anyone who wants to accompany us in this, who wants to push the direction of a prosperous Argentina will always be welcome, but know that we are unbreakable in our iron conviction that prevents us from deviating 1 millimeter from the direction that we have drawn. Argentina will leave after its century of humiliation, and once for all, that is why not voting is not a viable option in this opportunity, because on the other side there are fiscal Panamanians willing to go to vote as many times as necessary to stay. At the expense of our effort, they were never interested in doing anything else, so they depend on us to tip the scale and tell them never again to their misdeeds, never again to their misery, never again to use the money of all Argentines as aid. Watch us, never again to fiscal slavery, never again to chauvinism. For all this, I want to thank all those present for being part of this conference. May God bless the Argentines. May the force of heaven be with us, and long live freedom.
¡Viva la libertad, carajo!